you're all welcome to join and consider that. Just a quick important notice, but just to let everybody know, this is being recorded. And just please, no pitching, even if you are a client. I don't think it would violate that. Everyone's eyes and ears are more open when you're teaching us something. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, pickleball looks great. Hopefully that backlog and shipping clears up and you get the rackets in time. So thank you everybody for
We have enough rackets.
Sorry, didn't mean to say that. Thank you everybody for joining today, and always appreciate our friends at 361 Firm for hosting these spotlights. As Mark mentioned, the goal is education. My name is Anand Shahi. I am president of Bar Capital, as well as a number of other entities in kind of the bar family. And so our goal has been to do series of sessions on specific topics within cannabis. This is the third social equity focused event so far. We have done in-person events in Las Vegas as well when we had an event in November. I know Sam is on from one of our sponsors and partners for that event. And so I wanted to lay the groundwork for the conversation. First of all, I'll go over kind of the intent of how we structure panelists. Social equity is a very hot topic, and rightfully so. It is a topic that has impacted especially the African-American community for decades in a very negative manner in terms of cannabis as an industry. So the goal of our panels is really to get diversity in terms of people focused on how to correct or improve that wrong. And so we will have people that have diverse backgrounds, not only Black panelists or female panelists or male panelists or any of those categories, but really try to dig into it from various aspects. The last panel we had in Vegas was, mostly Black and Asian. I'm Indian myself. So I just wanted to address that because we get feedback from time to time, and we made a real effort to go into diversity. And so we've deepened the benches, and I'm really excited, as I know Mark is, on that front. With that said, I'm going to do a quick.
Sorry, could I just add, prisoner education is a focus for us as well, and a lot of people that in the 90s they got caught up on that, and this is like the elegance. Let's solve this, and that's part of, you need a holistic solution. So there are other ways that we could bear down on this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'll give an overview of the schedule today. What I'm going to do is, cover the initial bios. Each speaker is going to just give a quick 2-minute bio. If they have some slides, they're going to show some slides. I may ask a couple of questions. I'm joined today by my co-moderator and partner, Jim Hawk, on the BarCap Global side. We'll kind of spare you our bios in the interest of time, but Bar Capital and the family of bar entities is very much focused on moving cannabis forward as an industry in a very compliant, legal, and mainstream way. I think there's a lot of progress that has been made. There's a lot more work left to do, both at the local municipal level, all the way to the state and to the federal levels. Internationally, it is moving fast. In Europe, Germany is now showing signs it's going to go recreational. Now, it could take a while for that to happen, but big markets are starting to open up. And I think the U.S. has to address it at a federal level. Doesn't matter who's in power or what the politics behind it are. It's going to become larger and larger as a functioning industry until, hopefully there's a public-private partnership in solving some of these large issues. With that said, we'll get kind of kicked off. The themes around the conversations are varied, but today we're going to kind of focus on policy. What's working well, what's not. What are some of the nitty-gritties of the way the federal level policies are being structured? What are they missing? How are they defining certain things that could come up? Training and access. So how are we going to empower the social equity recipients of licenses, for example, to succeed as a business. And whether, not everybody's trying to become a giant multinational, multi-state operator if they're starting off at that point, right? What we're trying to do is also create small businesses that are kind of the fabric of many other industries. And how do you train, empower, and give support to those folks? And then looking also at what are the remaining biggest challenges, and comparing and contrasting them in different geographies or different levels of government. But I'll kick off by turning the mic over to Sloan Barbour, and he'd like to share some slides. So Inessa, I think if you're controlling that, he's going to go ahead and share screen. Sloan, if you could give a kind of quick intro on yourself, your background, and why you're engaged in this space, and then kind of walk us through some of the high-level stuff you were talking about in terms of data points. That would be great.
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Your screen also, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Hello, everyone. It's great to meet you all. My name is Sloan Barbour. I'm the founder and CEO of Engine. Engine is a future of work company. We're a software platform that's basically designed from the ground up for the cannabis industry in particular. And we've been around for about a year and have worked with several dozen customers across the supply chain and in multiple different states. And we've learned a ton about what it really means to hire and scale within the cannabis industry. And prior to starting Engine with my partner, Valerie, who's our CTO, I was with a company called Flower Hire, and Flower Hire is sort of the industry's leading executive search firm. And we learned a great deal about sort of the senior level executives and what folks are looking for and who's transitioning from outside the space into sort of, the regulated cannabis markets across the country. And so we've taken and combined that data between your sort of senior level six-figure workers and, the largest cross-section of the industry, which is the hourly workforce, which is about 90% of cannabis workers are hourly. And just to set the stage in terms of industry growth, and folks may already know this, but the cannabis industry over the last several years has been the fastest growing industry by percentage job growth in the country. So it's growing at an average of 28% compound annual growth rate. The next closest industry would be like green technology and sustainable energy, which grows at about 13 to 14%. So it's basically growing twice as fast. The industry supports about 350,000 workers. And one of the biggest challenges is hiring the right people and retaining them. So just to sort of start with setting that stage, this is what the growth looks like across the industry. And 2022 is poised to be a significant growth year. As folks know, we had multiple states that voted to legalize and multiple states that are coming online, like New Jersey on the East Coast. And towards the end of the year, you'll see New York. And you're seeing growth even in medical states like Pennsylvania and Florida, where you have Florida employing 40,000 people, which is just a few thousand less than what you have in California, even though it's purely a medical state. So this is not a specific sort of just to California, Colorado, Washington, which a lot of people maybe who are outside the industry have that perception. This is happening in every single state. And what we're seeing across the sort of overall geographic trends is that in 2020, the work that we did across the country was really focused on California. That was just the state that has the most amount of cannabis workers. About 60,000 people work in the legal cannabis industry in California. And which, by the way, is like 3 times the amount of people there are dentists in the state, right? So it's a big industry that people, really have gotten into middle-class careers, starting entry level in the space. But what we've seen and what we expect to continue is that really things are moving to the East and the Midwest very rapidly. So our numbers from 2021 show that you've seen states like Pennsylvania really come online, which has a very robust medical market. You see states like Michigan and Florida and Massachusetts all eating into the overall West Coast market share. And these folks are not just in that state, maybe working in retail or hospitality, moving into cannabis, there is a lot of folks that are actually moving from existing states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and California, where the market's a little bit more mature, to take a shot in a startup company or startup market and make their mark on the industry. So this is more broadly how we're seeing things transition. And what's good to know for anyone that's on this that may be interested in transitioning into a career in cannabis, or as friends who are interested, is it's truly one of the most diverse sort of types of jobs that exist within one industry. Because when you think about it, you have elements of pharmaceutical, medical, elements of consumer packaged goods, elements of sort of vice like you would with alcohol and tobacco, elements of hospitality with social consumption, elements of cultivation and agriculture that exist in mass with things like corn or soybeans or raspberries, right? So you have these amalgamations of different types of skill sets that really are being brought to bear within the industry. But the biggest thing that we're trying to solve at INGEN is, and what we think from a social equity perspective is very important, is how do people actually find the right fit within the industry? And because a lot of folks that are entering the industry don't have a relevant resume or don't understand how to communicate their skills that transition into the industry effectively, you end up with people getting into the wrong job, and the churn in this industry is about 2 to 3 times as high as it would be in any other industry just because of that. So it actually is a limiting factor for growth, and it also can put the wrong taste into a new employee's mouth early on. So that's what we're seeking to solve by allowing people to basically create a cannabis specific resume. Here's some examples of our product that would allow someone to take and build their resume, match to specific jobs, all within the INGEN platform that they know that they're a fit for from both a hard skills and a soft skills perspective. So we think that if we can create transparency and create a standardized system that people can enter the industry through, we can also help improve equity by reducing unconscious bias, which is a major problem in hiring in general and is specifically acute in this space. So I just wanted to set the stage so folks know what this growth in this industry looks like, and the fact that we are at the cusp of an industry that's going to grow from 350,000 to 1 million workers over the next 5 to 7 years. And because we're at still the first or second inning of the industry, we have an opportunity to build it from the ground up and to build it correctly and to build it in an equitable way.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Sloan. So that gives us kind of the framework on the job opportunity scene, as well as some of the challenges in kind of training and fit. I'd like to kind of go through each of the speakers to give a quick bio, and then we'll circle back to some of those themes. Next up, Chance, if you'd like to give a quick intro and kind of how you're tied into the cannabis space.
Can I make a little extra intro for
Sure.
Chance?
Sure.
Oh, here we go.
Look at him smile. I'm going to give you
All
a
right.
pregnant pause. Chance and I were roommates in Cleveland, Ohio. I met him when I was taking the bar exam in Columbus, Ohio. And he's a great guy. Was a great roommate, and he's done really great things that he may not talk about for Oprah. First I came back from Russia. He was like employee number 8 at when it was Sirius or XM. And he's just done so many great things. And now with the King Center, and I just wish he would like come to more events. Like hopefully this will catalyze that. So back to you.
It will. I'm excited to be here, and thank you, Mark. And I remember the times well, and cherish your friendship. And thanks to Jim and Anand for prepping me for today's call as well. And actually, I'm at the King Center. This is a big week coming up. We have the King holiday, as we all know, and we have a surprise guest today. The president has decided to come and visit us, so I'm holed up in a side room here to talk, but I wanted to make sure I was part of the conversation. And I'm serving in an interim capacity to head up comms and marketing for the King Center. They're a client of mine, and so I do this both on the corporate side and on the nonprofit side to help my clients communicate, their story of impact. And also because I have a tech background, I help them scale. so they can generate more donations and revenue and have greater impact. And I fancy myself a bridge, so I try to get as many corporate organizations that want to act with purpose and not just writing checks. They want to really demonstrate purpose and connect them with the nonprofit and mission world so they can actually do that. I'll take, while I'm mentioning the president, the fact is government has largely vacated its role in doing that and driving social change, right? So we have to have the corporate world engaging, using their resources, talent, dollars to address our culture's biggest challenges, right? And so that's where I want to sit. I want to see our businesses driving change side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the social impact world. So the world is a better place.
Thank you, Chance. Appreciate that. And thank you for being part of the panel. I think that's a key point, is how do we do that public-private connection with the purpose in mind. So we'll circle back to you in a minute on the panel questions. Next up, I'll turn it over to Eugene Monroe to give a quick background and kind of how you're involved in the space, Eugene.
Hey, thanks for the invite here. Thanks for what you're doing, highlighting social equity here. I'm Eugene Monroe from New Jersey originally. I have a career background in athletics. I was a first-round draft pick in the 2009 NFL draft. That career really led me to cannabis, really for health reasons. I was really prescribed opioids and anti-inflammatories on a daily basis and saw cannabis as a healthier alternative, but at the same time saw the really growing business opportunity. For me, that meant Maryland at the time. That process had opened for licensing there. So I invested in the business, and that really opened my eyes to exactly what we're focused on here. Being in cannabis, helping build one of the largest cannabis companies in our country, being the only Black person in most any room I had been in, whether it was internal or, us going out, meeting with other folks, particularly when, raising capital as well. And then also the competitive landscape showed me that there was a real lack, not only in the presence of minority companies, and there are a couple, but the scale of their businesses as well, and their ability to, even compete, and maintain shelf space in people's stores. So there's a lot of problems baked into there. My, main interest in cannabis has really come to be in cultivation, as I've been cultivating myself, coming up on 10 years here, but really having that commercial experience as well. But seeing that as a real bridge to, making social equity efforts real. Some states like New Jersey, have legalized and created new legal structure to, allow for sort of a more unique landscape and abilities for businesses like mine to make investments and incubate some of these businesses. We're also doing that up in New Jersey. So, a year ago, myself and a crew, some my good friends from Green Thumb Industries, that company I helped build, and some others that I met along the way, who really all just believe that we have a chance here to make a real impact in people's lives. Success for us doesn't look like, helping 100 companies. It's one at a time. And we're finding that, it's more than capital that's needed here. So, we're becoming true partners with the folks we've invested in to date. So, really excited about doing that, as well as, our love to cultivate and our push to build a business and brand that, we look to cultivate and build a facility and business that will scale, but we're not playing the MSO game. We're not going to overbuild our facilities and put subpar product into the market. We truly love cannabis on a deep level. It's changing our lives and our families and our friends. And so with that, we're creating an opportunity, one, to invest in folk who need it and, you know, are pushing to excel in this space, but also just to really do what we love. And that's going to help a lot of people along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Appreciate that. And we're going to circle back to some of those themes you mentioned. So thank you for that perspective. Next up, I'll turn it over to Rebecca Collette to give a quick intro. And I see Chris Crane is also on the line. I just wanted to thank Chris for much of the panelists that you see actually connecting us to them, and always appreciate your help, Chris, on these panels. Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Hello, guys. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chris, for the invite. Hi, my name is Rebecca Collette. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. I do a few things in the cannabis industry. I run and operate a cannabis cultivation and processing brand based in Michigan, Collexium. We service dispensaries all around the state of Michigan with flower, topicals, and edibles. We are a Black women-owned and operated cultivation brand. On the East Coast, I believe we're the only one. I'm not excited about that statistic, but excited about just pulling more people into the industry that look like me. I also run and operate a social equity incubator that has partnered with the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. Through that social equity incubator, we provide technical business resources to social equity applicants. We go through a myriad of different business topics because, like many of my other panelists have mentioned here, it takes more than money to support a social equity applicant in the cannabis space. So we take a lot of these social equity applicants through courses on business, accounting, marketing, SOPs, operations, human resources, etc. Really teaching them just key things to running a cannabis business. I'm also on the board of the National Cannabis Industry Association. Very excited about my work there. And then I also run and operate a local community-based nonprofit in the Detroit area. We rebuild dilapidated homes. We have an after-school program, and we do some community garden work in the local Detroit area. Happy to be here. Thank you for the intro.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that. All very important work. And last but not least, I'd like to turn it over to Sean Burt. Is it Burt or Bertie? Sorry, Sean. Oh, you're on mute.
That's right. Common mistake. It's Birdie.
Birdie. I thought, okay. Sean Birdie to give a quick intro, and then we'll start opening it up to ask some questions of the panel by me and Jim.
Thanks for having me here, Anand. My name's Sean Birdie, lifelong Boston resident. In 2001, I became a Boston firefighter and started a career at Ladder 17 in the Chinatown Park Plaza area of downtown Boston. And in 2010, I was indicted and incarcerated in federal prison for cultivating marijuana plants in the state of Maine. Fast forward a little bit, at that point, marijuana had ruined my life. And it was legalized while I was incarcerated for a medical level. At that point, I said, when I get out, we'll figure out how to do this legally. And it's been a one foot in front of the other type situation ever since. And right now, we have a host community agreement, and our application is ongoing with the state of Massachusetts for our first retail marijuana store in my home neighborhood, Hyde Park, Massachusetts, which is in the southwest corner of Boston. We are slated to open in July, August of this year. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Sean. So let me start off at that viewpoint. So, there's different viewpoints involved here. There's the person, who's been affected by the prior regulatory framework for cannabis, and it changed while you were in that process, and so now there's a different opportunity, but you have a record, given that past. And so could you talk more about what is it like from that perspective to be able to get a chance at either a job in this industry or a chance to get the application? How have you found that journey, and what has been helpful in terms of resources, or what's been very frustrating in terms of potentially process? Give us a framework for that perspective.
Yeah, well, when medical was passed in Massachusetts, it was illegal for me to be in a dispensary unless I was a consumer, unless I was a patient. So things have changed quite drastically in Massachusetts since then with the passage of Question 4 and 16. I'm now encouraged to try my hand at ownership by the state, which has been a nice change, rather than being turned down to, for instance, volunteer. It's helpful, whether you have whatever your crime is for, whatever your conviction is for. It's tough when you're searching for work, because you have to bring it up. So the fact that this industry is encouraging not just ownership, but employment opportunities to those that were incarcerated, to those that were historically disenfranchised and hurt by the war on drugs, it's the right step forward.
And so you have a partner, I believe, Armani White, who we kind of wanted to have one slot for both of you. So you took this one, and I'm sure we'll have him on future ones, who's African American, I believe. And so can you talk about how you both connected, or how you know him, and kind of went through this application process?
Sure. We have a program at the state level called Economic Empowerment, and it's a certification program that were able to qualify for shortly after the 2016.
Oh, I think we lost audio for you, Sean.
Yeah, I can't hear him.
He's now.
Sean, oh, there we go. Now you're back.
Nope, sorry about that. Yes, so we met through Equitable Opportunities Now, which is a local advocacy group specifically geared towards the cannabis industry. At one of our events that we were signing people up for this new economic empowerment program, we just kind of hit it off, and lo and behold, together we qualified for it. So we signed up together as a team and been working magic ever since.
Great. And so assuming you win the license, in terms of going through that process of getting the stuff together and getting it funded in terms of the application, could you talk a little bit more about that? And then what is going to be your next challenge? I don't want to pre-fill the answer there. I have a sense of it, but how are you thinking through, how do we get this application done? Who do we have to call? Who really helped us? And then what are we going to do immediately after, if we're awarded it, to try and turn it into a business?
You got to find people that are smarter than you and put them in the same room. Is what we try to do the whole time. There are operations people that we include that have done similar operations. There are investors that we want to include that bring more than just money to the table. They bring a partnership that basically fosters our development as business owners.
Thank you. And so the reason I'm asking some of these questions is, there's the new applicant point of view, and in many cases that could include having a record, being involved in the cannabis kind of gray market previously, or I guess currently it's the gray market. And then the other side is the person kind of giving you the capital, right? What are they looking for in you? And so you identified some of the key points, having that room of different skills and backgrounds to be able to round out a team that can have a shot at success in this venture. The other thing I wanted to bring up, which came up in our prep call, is you mentioned, and I know Chance is on the call, and so maybe he can whisper this in Biden's ear in a few minutes here when he's interacting with the president. But you mentioned the current proposals for federal level regulation. You know, one of the themes we've been talking about is, hey, how do we create potentially jobs for people who are going to be let out for prior convictions that should be let out because the rules are changing, and so how does that whole prison release piece work? And you pointed out it's not as wonderful as it seems based on the current language. So could you talk a little bit about that part?
Sure. I think we need to recognize that not everybody who gets out of prison for marijuana wants to enter the industry, first and foremost. And we need to recognize that the efforts being made at the federal level for expungement or criminal record vacating of criminal records, the language being used is only applicable to those who were convicted of marijuana possession. And it's a very easy thing to fall back on because, of course, everybody should be allowed to carry their own personal amount of marijuana. But the problem is less than 1% or less than 2% of the people who are convicted for marijuana crimes are convicted for possession. So by producing or promoting a scenario where people are expunged for possession, that doesn't really help. That doesn't help somebody getting out of prison for what's now legal, and they don't want to go into the cannabis industry. They want to go somewhere else, right?
So,
they still have that record following them.
So in other words, I think what you were laying out in the scenario is you maybe the police saw that you had a small amount of cannabis, and so that was the gateway into them looking at you and seeing what else they could find. And so maybe that person had a weapon or some other infraction that the police then booked them for instead of the cannabis possession.
Yeah, Sean, when we spoke last, you were talking about a very high incidence of, the extra effort on the part of law enforcement to actually, seek out a weapon.
Well, it used to be that you would seek out cannabis because that gave them the gateway to seek out more crimes. And predominantly you would find that in the city with Black youth or Black men. And you would also, with cannabis, you would find it in the rural areas with the country growers, the white countrymen. Guns are a cultural thing in our country, and just having one doesn't make you a violent criminal, but the law enforcement would always look to enhance offenses.
Thank you, Sean. And so I'll kind of ask the follow-up question to the full panel. In that part where you have to show as a applicant in for one of these licenses that you're kind of able to make a success out of this, and you have some of the connections and resources. What are some of the support what is some of the support that's out there right now, and some of it's things that some of the panelists are involved with? How do you see it as something that can potentially be scaled? Because I know certain states have done more than others. Rebecca, you're tied into Michigan, which I think is one of the more kind of leading progressive cannabis-friendly states from what I've experienced in doing the 361 firm tour and getting to hear the lieutenant governor speak and just other interactions with operators in the state. So maybe you address this next, but what's available right now to help folks like Sean connect with Armani and then go ahead and find the ways to do this? How do we help to provide more of the support needed to even get started in that process?
Yes, no problem. So resources in the cannabis space for social equity applicants, they exist, but they are incomplete. So from the state level, they basically act as coupons. Me and my partner, we're social equity applicants, so we got a certain percentage off of our application and our licensing fees. And that's it. They're like, oh, now you can open this business, right? It should be so easy now that we gave you 20% off. Wrong. There's a whole educational aspect that the states really don't understand. So there are a lot of private programs out there, incubators, accelerators, that a lot of private cannabis companies have started. You have the big ones like Ease and their Momentum program. We're a partner with them in that program. You have Cookies, they have an incubator program. Viola also does some work. So you have those big corporate cannabis companies that do some work and provide some educational resources or tours or mentorship. Locally in the Detroit metro area, shameless plug, we have the Detroit Cannabis Project. And the reason that we're different is because I have a business background. I've not always been in cannabis, surprisingly, but almost 8 years now. But prior to cannabis, I was in corporate America. I worked on Wall Street in Manhattan for Morgan Stanley. I have an MBA from one of the best business schools in the world. So I understand business. I know I'm a unicorn, but I understand business. And when I transitioned into the cannabis space, what I realized is that a lot of people that look like me or that were from similar neighborhoods, I'm from Detroit, a lot of people that were from similar backgrounds, they lack that business acumen. They maybe understood how to grow cannabis or make a dope edible, but they didn't understand accounting. They had no idea what 280E was. They had no idea what SOPs were. They had no idea about human resource and protocols. So what we did is we developed a curriculum that fills in the gap with the business acumen that a lot of times these social equity applicants, they have no idea. Yes, they want to enter the cannabis space, but they've never run a business before. So we talk about accounting and just general practices, how to write a pitch deck. What are some best tips in your elevator pitch? How do you write financial projections? What is evaluation? What are the aspects of evaluation? And how can you defend that to a prospective investor? So the resources they exist, but they definitely are lacking. And, for social equity applicants out there that want to enter the space, I think the best approach is to join any program that you can, because from one program, you can gather these resources, and then you can come over to us and gather these resources, and then you can go to Ease and get a grant, and then you can get a grant from here and put it all together. So that's kind of what's going on, at least on the East Coast. I know in the Bay Area, in Oakland, they have a lot of these resources, plus low interest loans and grants. So we're working to do that also in the Midwest, provide funding on top of education.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think, one of the issues we've seen in prior panels on this topic is, grants are great, and the coupon you mentioned, it's great, to have some level of initial support, but it's not enough. And sometimes just having that and cutting those checks and it going to folks that it's like a drip instead of the flood of support and help and connectivity they need to succeed. So it's almost some ways wasted money. Some folks like MSOs might be cutting checks and grants partially, for PR, and I'm sure there's good intent behind it, but they're not going to be able to follow up with each of those grant winners at the same detail as could be done if there was something more unified in the space and kind of lessons learned. So I think one of the key areas is how do you use the capital wisely from the public and from the private side to kind of not just give them an inkling of getting started, but really getting behind the community to help them train and grow in their roles. Eugene, what are your thoughts on that same question? What do you see in the landscape right now, and what's working and not working?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of insert a follow-on to that. And Eugene, I'm sure from your work in New Jersey, you're following closely the $200 million fund that's been established by the state of New York to try and and fund some of the social equity work. I'm really interested in your view, and Rebecca's as well, and anybody else on the panel for that matter, of how a public and private sector collaboration can work, because I think, you know, it's probably very difficult for either one of those individually to be successful given the need for infrastructure and legislation and all the other important components to get this as right as possible. So how do you think that can how do you think that, I appreciate the inherent caveat in that.
You asked me to answer the question that every state is like trying their hardest, really. It seems to get right, and it's very difficult. I mean, look, you talk about $200 million. Let's be real. 4 companies can outlay 50 million in phase 1 if they're building a business that's going to have the type of scale these MSOs have. So from that standpoint, it's really not a lot of money. So how do you determine who gets it, how and when, what types of businesses, because there's multiple license types. So, while that 200, million is that, maybe, there's some percentage of startup fees. But, this is a really capital intense business, which is why it's so difficult that, another thing that also hasn't happened is the ability for people to access traditional funding, right? To go to banks and leverage their money that they already have. I think that changes the social equity landscape a little bit, right? If you run another type of business, you can go and get a loan, but you definitely can't for cannabis. And quite frankly, my experience dealing with white men and Jewish men who are experienced that business and have had the conversations raising capital in the past, investors typically aren't having the same conversation or types of conversation with those Black business owners jockeying for the same license types. And quite frankly, the white MSO businesses that people talk about on the other side of equity are really no better at running a cannabis operation than the folks who aren't able to really put these opportunities to use. Most of them have never grown anything, let alone cannabis, and we see that in their products that they're putting in the market too. So this is a tough one, right? There's a lot of people who are fighting for this opportunity. We see that in Jersey just by the number of people who signed up immediately once the state opened the license portal. So interesting to see that $200 million injection. I'm not going to answer how I think best. I'm not sure. But I do know in the grand scheme of things, 200 million sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot of money.
Understood. Kind of table stakes from that perspective, maybe, but how, I think maybe the important part is how that initial spend happens, and if it, is actually focused somewhere where it can be a blueprint for something bigger, with some demonstrated traction or success.
Yeah, a blueprint or a mechanism for there'll be a way for that pile to grow, so you can continue to inject money into these businesses that will be a continual need, whether it's new businesses entering the market or these existing equity businesses that need to scale their operations.
Just to give a sense of how many people are applying, and this is not just for social equity, just license applications. For example, Ohio is doing a lottery, and for 73 licenses that they're potentially looking to do, I think this is on the medical side, they had 1,400 applicants, right, for 73 licenses, as an example. In terms of, Eugene, on the point of, taking a look at one aspect of it, what do you think is the most helpful from the government? There's a number of areas that can be more helpful but is it providing low-cost financing, since you mentioned that there is a lack of banking and loans in the industry?
ultimately, if equity applicants were given a real chance in these marketplaces, they would have the first chance in these marketplaces. Speed to market is king here. You're able to get your business up and running, at times where pricing in the market allows you to recoup your investment back twice as fast as others will who enter. And then you're also, right, when you're capitalized, your cost of production is a lot lower. So you can run a leaner business. Overall, as I look at, how New Jersey's doing this, right? They're even allowing bigger businesses to invest really a significant amount. I believe they can own up to 40% of some of these businesses. So the way, even how I've, had conversations with folks as it relates to ownership and the idea of ownership in the equity space really being an idea of, not giving any up when like sort of collaborating with people who do want to invest and aren't there to be predatory, but to be more helpful than just capital even. If we're able to create those opportunities first, I think, we'll see, a lot more successful deployment of any capital the states are earmarking.
Yeah, switching gears just slightly, I have a question related to kind of infrastructure in the space, which I think will be important as well, right? It's very hard to grow an industry without great infrastructure, forward-looking infrastructure, intuitive infrastructure, and that includes technology. So Sloan, and as kind of the resident technophile, what technologies like Engine, which is obviously a tech that's based on fit and retention in the space, and creating a good relationship between a hirer and an applicant and all that. What other types of technology can help democratize the hiring process or the process of proper fitment? Because as we have figured out from your slides, the Great Resignation is a real thing, but not so much in the cannabis space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. And first of all, just thank you to Eugene and Rebecca and Sean for all this great insight. It's really helping me, learn and continue to absorb. I think we're all sort of lifelong learners in the space. But just a few pieces that I talk on, both from a tech and just a broader sort of startup perspective. I've been in technology and specifically HR technology and recruiting for 15 years. So I've seen all sorts of companies come and go. And I think, it's important to just root ourselves in the fact that like, this is a startup industry and pretty much every company is a startup. And the percentage of these companies that fail just in the broader market doesn't have issues with banking or issues with federal illegality, struggle to succeed, and like 80% of them ultimately fail in some way, right? So I believe that, you need to sort of, if you want to create true equity over the course of the next decade, you need to create both an ownership stake and also a talent chain that is diverse and equitable. And what I mean by that is, most people who start businesses, I launched Engine a year ago. I have 15 years of experience working in similar businesses, getting a salary, being able to build a career and build skills. And I think when you look at what people have tried to do in social equity, and I would argue that for the most part, and I'm not saying this is everyone, but for the most part, it hasn't succeeded, unfortunately. In LA, in Oakland, there are currently a lot of businesses that are struggling, and a lot of entrepreneurs that we've spoke to that haven't been able to get their businesses off the ground, or haven't even gotten launched because of lack of capitalization, because of licensing issues, because of taxation, because of a lot of other sort of systemic elements. And so when you look at, well, how do you ultimately solve this problem over the next decade and create an equitable industry that can lead not just cannabis, but broader of the future of work, lead as being one of the best industries to work in? I believe you need a robust infrastructure around really building out that talent chain. And if you look at what some of the ideas that we have and some of the partnerships we have, you asked about other technology companies, Greenflower comes to mind, which is a fairly large and well-capitalized 6-year-old education technology education platform that's very scalable because it's built both with online learning and partnering with universities and community college to deliver credentials, to deliver industry accepted training, and to get people a foothold in some of the basic knowledge and skills that you need to be successful in the industry. And when you look at what this actually breaks down into and what Engine's trying to achieve is less so, picks and shovels, and more so like railroads and power lines. Because if you want to be able to connect an industry together and allow companies to hire the right people at the right time in the right place, you need to have talent pools developed and built in certain markets well ahead of the time that those markets actually come online. So I'm a New York-based person in New York City. I've been there for 11 years and worked closely with some of the folks developing the bill. We're very proud of the MRTA and some of the progressive equity requirements in the bill, including hiring requirements from certain zip codes. And as Eugene, I think, just mentioned, New York has announced a $100 million. I know New Jersey did one, and I know New York has also announced one as well that Governor Hochul mentioned around social equity funding at the launch of the market. And I do believe speed to market and financing is absolutely critical to any business, especially a social equity business. However, when you look at what the challenges are going to be, Rebecca sort of mentioned that we want to get folks into the space that don't have a traditional business background, but inevitably are going to need to run a high growth with outside capital in a federally illegal market that needs to remain incredibly compliant, or they're going to face fees and they're going to go out of business, right? Or they're going to be shut down. This is hard for someone who's got 20 years of experience working in alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceuticals. This is a difficult job, right? Being an executive or owning a cannabis company is one of the hardest jobs that exists. And so to expect someone to come either, out of prison or from a marginalized community that has been unfairly targeted by the war on drugs, give them a license, you're basically giving someone an invoice for $5 million and saying, you're going to have to get this money and you're going to have to start a business. And then maybe in 5 years, you'll start to be able to pay yourself. That doesn't sound like a very good opportunity to me, right? So what we view it as is, how do you create apprenticeship programs, and how do you create support systems in a local community that are both private-public partnership? Because the government, we've encouraged New York to sell municipal bonds to Wall Street ahead of taxation, right? There's going to be $500 million in cannabis taxes over the next 5 to 7 years. Sell it up front so that literally investors can invest in social equity operators, and the equity operators can get cash up front, pair them with a corporate or MSO, and have the MSO make an investment as well. Because ultimately, I believe that if you look at what's transpired in existing markets like California, that has really pushed social equity and talks a lot about it. Chris Ball, who is one of the first social equity applicants in California, he's probably one of the few success stories that we've heard of. And he even admits, and we've interviewed him, and that's available on the Flower Hire website, that it was a lot of different elements of both luck and connection for him that allowed him to be successful. And he's seen other social equity operators around him struggle to even get initial traction. And when you have 4 years into these programs in LA and Oakland, and you can't really point to companies that can truly compete on a state or eventually a national level, you realize that you really have to rethink the entire thing from the ground up. And yes, Momentum Accelerator, Ease is doing a great job with that. There's dozens of other things like that. There's folks like the People's Dispensary or the People's Ecosystem run by Christine De La Rosa that have this really great strategy to help invest in and cultivate ownership stakes for social equity operators across the country. But these companies also need to capitalize, right? And if you're an investor coming into the space and you have a chance to invest in someone who's got 15 years of experience and 3.5 years of cannabis experience and a track record that's proven, or someone that has no official business experience, like, whether it's fair or not is sort of a separate question. But if you're looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, investors are going to lean towards someone that they know is going to be a safer bet. So I think systemically, there's a lot of challenges. I believe that getting people real world experience, 18 months working in a cannabis company as an apprentice, starting in a retail or cultivation role and moving up to a manager or director level, which is totally possible in this space inside of 18 months. The amount of career growth exists. And then allowing that person, with the support of their current company, to go out and apply and get a social equity license. That to me is a much more viable solution, because that person's much more likely to succeed. They've been inside and they realize, maybe, do I even want to do this? Because some of these folks in California we spoke to, they're like, I kind of regret even trying, because this has been such a headache and I've lost a lot of money and time, and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And as an entrepreneur, man, I can relate to that. And I feel really sort of bad for these folks. So we've tried to help them. Okay, well, we'll get you a job in another company, and then let's try again in 2 years when, you know, you have a bit more experience and some cash in your pocket. So I think technological infrastructure to help create access and opportunity to everyone with a mobile device, by being able to empower them to, you know, learn about the industry, get connected to jobs, and then find their path that goes beyond just being a salaried employee and actually becoming an owner at some point, is a key part of solving this problem at scale.
Thank you, Sloan. So it's interesting, you know, I agree on many of those points. You know, the current system, and this ties into some of the prior panelists' comments as well. It's almost like you got to get over the hurdle of applying, then you got to get over the hurdle of, you know, when you win the license, scaling, and hopefully you get first entry into the market, because when the MSOs come in, they're going to do the volume in, you know, low cost game, and you can't beat them at that at scale. So to be viable in that marketplace, you kind of have to have a differentiated product. Very tough to do, you know. But there's also interesting themes of, and I know Lauren has been listening, I believe, you know, and he's pointed this out many times, and appreciated him kind of pointing this out. Is there's also a lot of gray market kind of participants, people who have a lot of experience cultivating before legalization in their state or geography, and are not able to enter the space legally, easily, but may be perfect for the apprenticeship program in teaching certain skills, even in operationally running what they were doing, right? So there's some really interesting themes on that front, because there is a lot of experience that's there, that exists. Jim, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off, because I know you had some questions. Did you have any follow-ups or any other questions there?
So I do. I have one for Sean and then one for Chance. So Sean, you know, yours is kind of a unique relationship between you and the community in which you're going to open shop very soon here. And, you know, I think I'd like to give you a heartfelt congratulations on putting that one foot in front of the other. You're almost there, so stay the course. But you know, you have you're the place in the community, and the community endorsement of your, you know, operational dispensary was, you know, is kind of an interesting scenario. Can you describe how that process worked, how you decided to go back to where it kind of began for you, and how you found a willing partner in the community?
Yeah, that was probably the most nerve-wracking part of this process. You know, going through the community process. You know, even today, even at this meeting here, telling people that you committed a felony and were incarcerated, it's never easy to, like, it's not an easy bump to get over and tell people. But in order to be here, you know, I had to get comfortable with it, had to own it, and I didn't know how it was going to happen, how people would react. You know, obviously there were a few that are stuck in the past who don't want somebody owning a shop in the neighborhood that was convicted of any crime. Not really getting through to them, but overwhelmingly, people in your community want you to do good. You know, we ended up having competition, but because of the buffer zone in Boston, it came down to a choice the community had, and they chose us versus one of the largest MSOs in the country. So it's, yeah, it was quite the ordeal. But then as we move forward and we look, we get the agreement from the city to go after our license, and we teamed up with Eugene for a number of reasons. You know, we didn't want just money. We wanted to have somebody that understood where we were coming from, as people who used to sell weed, people who used to grow weed. And you know, we kind of hit a home run with them, and we were able to, you know, team up with somebody who understands growing, team up with somebody who understands selling it on the legal market, because he's got his feet wet with GTI. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And,
Awesome.
and thanks for the candid answer.
I think Jim's got one more question. Then Lauren, you're going to be the first audience question. We're going to kick it off to the audience.
I'm going to have to filibuster here. You know, Lauren, I've got to like make sure he can't get on the audio. Long time no see, Lauren. Good to see you. Chance, you know, there's so much that we've covered today, and as someone who has spent a lot of time trying to figure out the right way for messaging, you know, how can we be, how can we bring clarity of message to the important parts of what we're really trying to do here around the education and the ideation and the constructive dialogue that needs to happen to get some of these things across the threshold?
Yeah, well, amazing folks here today. You know, I'm just wildly impressed. Sean, your story, you know, hit me hard when we did our prep session before the holidays. And, you know, hearing Sloan, you know, give really just amazing context for what this dilemma looks like from an employment standpoint. And then Rebecca and Eugene, you know, I just look at this as, you know, when you are Black and trying to, you know, thrive in the business world, you have to be exceptional. You have to be truly exceptional, you know. And then you still may not make it. You still may not meet the mark for what, you know, there's a lot of barriers. And that's, you know, we know that, and, you know, it's part of life in our, you know, country and this society. And so, you know, knowing that, we have to be very intentional, right? And I think Sloan said it well, where you have to create all kinds of different programs to bring people into this industry in different ways, developing skills. And I do think it's not going to be a one size fits all solution, but I think that, you know, it has to be anchored in an intention. I don't think it's necessarily a quota, but we have to have a longer vision on what we can pretty much forecast what this industry is going to look like in 2, 4, 10 years. And so I think in that way, looking at all the different elements, the growing, the training, the licensure, all of that, everything should be taken into consideration. I'll give a point of reference. Some of you are familiar with this critical race theory issue that's going on in the country, where they're trying to roll back what type of books are being taught, and history lessons are being taught to younger students. And you know, most people don't even know what critical race theory is, right? So we're actually, there's this whole, you know, wave happening in the country, and you know, we have no idea. We have no idea. And I think there's a corollary here. What I'm getting at is we have to have people like Sloan and Eugene and Rebecca and others who are actually collecting the data and saying, what is the actual industry experience looking like? What are we seeing from one state to the next? You know, you hear $200 million, you think that's a lot of money. That's really, but as he unpacked it, it made it clear that's not. So I think, our goal would, if I were from a policy standpoint, I would really, really, really just compel the private and public actors here to do deep research, get very, very smart. We see so many of these things that fail, so many of these attempts to infuse capital fail. The licensing programs don't quite meet the market times. So I don't want to sound dour and dark about it, but I am also an attorney. So the facts mean a lot to me. And the truth and the real information means a lot to me. So I think building these coalitions where people are actually talking about what is the real experience, where is the industry going, and how can, what do we want the industry to look like 10 years from now? That's a fair question to ask, right? And it may take 6, 8, 10 months to, develop a data set and a set of recommendations, but that could be done. I think that should be done now. That investment I'd rather see several $1 million spent on the data to project what we want the industry, what we think the industry is going to look like, and then say, okay, how does equity play to that? What would that look like for Black folks, for underprivileged folks, for ex-felons, all of that? Because I'd say with my clients, any project, if I'm launching a consumer product, dealing with a social justice issue, you name it, I deal in real information. If you wanna just spin and bullshit and just create a fantasy, you don't want to hire a guy like me. I deal in the real. So and on that basis, I would say let's just get the information. Let's put the government and the private side together in figuring out what is a real forecast for the industry. What do we want it to look like? What would success look like?
Thanks, Chance. Lauren?
Kick us off, Lauren, with the audience Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. First off, want to thank you, or respect for even bringing this, idea of, using this as a platform, to talking about the whole prison piece and reintegrating people into society. I like that because you could say avenue where we can, talk about, avenues of cooperation, because I know the grassroots is talking about that a lot, right? And so I think it's encouraging to hear that you folks are, are talking about that too. I'll try to make a question out of it, but real quick, one idea, one way to, a good way that we can start talking about, you could say bringing more, equity into this whole space. If you're talking about this issue of, you could say, experience and, trying to get people the, experience and knowledge in the industry. One of the things I've been promoting a lot is this idea of other sides of the industry, other than just dispensaries, other than just like the flowers. Certainly, what we were talking about an hour before about, the whole, cultivation thing. But apart from that, we all know that there's a whole lot of other sides to this industry. So real quick, there are, for instance, Black and brown companies who are, for instance, established in stuff like accounting, are getting into, finance, even stuff like marketing and branding, where it may be you could say, quicker on ramp in terms of being able to bring, because they, would have already, you could say, some of these credentials that would be needed to say, okay, let's invest in them, right? So I think that, that's one light at the end of the tunnel in terms of, some types of things that we can do to, impact things now. So the question would be, does this network also have folks, and I know the answer is yes, people that are working in other parts of the industry other than, dispensaries, and, how can we connect them to Black and brown businesses?
Thank you, Lauren. And it doesn't have to be a question. You can also contribute. There's a lot of people that have attended the full series of social equity panels we've done and have been prior panelists either on those or other panels. So, this is also a kind of a think tank session of how do we help move this forward. So thanks for that. Anybody want to kind of address that or know of any resources where it's being done at scale in terms of connecting some of those services to Black and brown business owners or people who are trying to build their equity in the industry?
I
I'll
am.
hop in, Anon.
You go ahead.
I can tell you about us, Anon. In Boston, in Massachusetts, we have the Black Chamber of Commerce, BECMA, and they list, if you're going to find a minority or woman-owned business in Massachusetts, it's kind of difficult to navigate the state website. So BECMA has extrapolated the Black businesses so that we can utilize that to filter out the filtering's already been done for us. And we're utilizing local connections for, everything from shoveling to cleaning all the way up through security and accounting. We are taking it on ourselves to only interview Black-owned companies.
And then can I just say a couple of words?
Yeah, absolutely.
As some of you may know, my businesses are in the middle of the Black and brown communities because I run operations across Southern Africa to grow food and also to focus on cannabis, which is one of the products that we're about to start growing in Zambia. Probably the best place to grow. One of the best places to grow cannabis in the world is in Zambia, where David Livingstone, in fact, first grew it, and we're based in Livingston. One of the big sites is based in Livingston. We're currently growing, organic cotton for a Zara buyer, and we're growing other things, producing plant protein and starting to do that in Mozambique. But this cannabis, it's interesting to hear everyone speak about how far ahead that America is to Africa. And that's an obvious statement, but I feel like I'm a cowgirl that's listening to a bunch of people that are driving Fords. We are in a different stratosphere now in Africa because only 9 countries currently have just started to get licenses to grow cannabis, and Zambia is the 9th. So our farm is one of those 6 in Zambia that has secured a license, and so we're starting that now. The reason I'm bringing this up is the costing, and this is fascinating. So it's an intensive crop. We all know that. Just to give you some idea of the costs, when I think you spoke, Eugene, about $200 million, which to us is just an eye-wateringly huge sum of money in Africa, that would just go miles. And to develop 100 hectares, to develop 200 hectares, so 500 acres, well-developed, with a processing plant on site, will cost less than $5 million in Africa. And that would produce quite substantial volumes and make a return of 70% per annum on that crop. It just gives you some idea when the pay scale, and this is above the minimum wage in Zambia, when the pay scale is between $100 and $200 per month, and there is substantial land available to put in large production centers and very good airports nearby with good roads that have been built by the Germans, actually. It's interesting as I listen to everyone here, because you are so advanced in what you are doing in cannabis, even though I know this is an embryonic business, or not quite embryonic, but it's certainly an early business, an early stage business. I look at Africa, and we just have to learn from what is going on in America and leapfrog and take the best out of what we possibly can from what you are doing there, and harness that to accelerate the business in Africa, because these will continue to pop up in Africa as more and more governments realize the great value on many levels, including in employment, which is critical because it's the biggest issue that Africa faces, apart from a lack of food security. In any case, I bring this up because I am really startled by the sums involved and the grants that you can access and the very low cost of funding. It just is it's unavailable in Africa. So what we will only eat what we kill, and we depend on ourselves, and we often self-fund. That is how desperate that it is to get money into Africa. But there's a willing workforce. There are multiple people that want to be trained, and it's obviously largely Black. But it's a very interesting dichotomy to hear the differences here.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, and it's really great to hear that as somebody who's been moderating this and with Jim, I know, and with Mark Sainer, that a lot of what we try to do here is connect people from the West Coast and Canada and East Coast and Midwest and sometimes other countries, South America, Africa, so that there can be an exchange and lesson learned. Because the social equity issue is not, it's very, I think, pronounced in the US because we have a very prison as a business centric kind of viewpoint, which is really depressing and sad. But, similar issues exist in the UK and similar issues exist in South Africa and other countries where there's a big disparity between the beneficiaries and the people who are, kind of persecuted from an industry that can go from illegal to legal, depending on changes in government and public opinion. So.
And I mean, thank you, Anand. I mean, I would just say that as everyone grows their businesses in America, and surely they will, it is an interesting continent to examine, Africa, for the future of cannabis, because of the opportunities that lie therein, and because of the multiple social issues that are effectively solved and certainly actively addressed at a grassroots level by starting and developing these businesses on the ground. So I feel like we are USAID direct, because we are the ones giving those adult education classes in the evenings to our 200 farm workers, because we are the ones that are providing sacks of maize meal to the communities. It's not even waiting for someone else to come in. You really have to do it yourself. And
that's what I was thinking, Susan. You have a really almost kind of like grassroots organizer approach to it. And I really believe that there would be people here, in the United States, particularly, people in, communities that I'm familiar with, particularly if you're talking about the scale of what you're doing being comparatively so much lower. This idea of being able to, start a whole entire viable operation behind this that can employ, scores of people, at $5 million. I think that there would be a lot of people here who would be, interested in exploring that, especially with the, you could say, limited opportunities that you might have here in the United States, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to take up too much time, but it's just to say that $5 million, whether it's wherever it happens to be in Africa, creates a tidal wave of goodness, of a catalyst to business that is dramatic, and it doesn't create quite the same, obviously, in other continents, but it is monumental in Africa in the right hands.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Hey, Anand, it's Cedric here.
Hey, Cedric, how are you?
I'm well.
Hey, Cedric.
Good. Hello, Susan. I just wanted to always congratulate you and the team of putting on very interesting and compelling experiences. And the last few comments with Lauren, speaking of looking beyond the obvious of cultivation and retail, and then hearing Susan, speak. We have a similar experience of putting these alternative commodities or products like Lauren is talking about. We just happen to be doing bioplastics from hemp and cannabis. And so as Africa comes online, we're in Malawi. We have a partner who has one of the first licenses. And as they begin that pathway of cultivation of flower, it makes sense for them to go ahead and incorporate industrial hemp. Africa is already a plastic-free committed continent. And so the ability to develop models processes, whatever it may be, in Africa in a cost-effective way, as Susan is speaking, and then leapfrog back into the States. That's a very, very compelling model that I really appreciated hearing her, highlight, and then kind of tying back into what Eugene is speaking. The raising of capital, whether it's 20, 200, that is quite a task here, and the impact to just get into the market compared to create that kind of catalytic impact, on the continent of Africa. I just kind of find that compelling and wanted to put my 2 cents in on that.
And that's
Yeah,
that's
shameless plug too, Cedric, for Chicago South, and you trying to do your bioplastics thing here in Chicago.
That is correct. And I'm finding it easier to raise the smaller amounts of money, do one in Africa, and then it'll be easier for me to come back and raise the kind of money that will be here. It's a very real world experience on our side over here. And yeah, thank you, Lauren and Susan. I'll look forward to reconnecting.
And so that brings up a good point about the cannabis industry. So going back to the earlier commentary on the hurdles that you have to get over if you're on the social equity applicant side. Once you're running an operation, let's say you have a few licenses and cultivation operation, and maybe now you're in a place in a state where they're allowing you uniquely to do a vertically integrated license, so you can cultivate, process, and sell, versus others who are not allowed to have all three. Eventually, you are going to have to compete with the bigger players, and so there's going to have to, from any information I've looked at and just kind of thinking out into the future, there's going to have to be some program, government or privately supported, where there is either subsidization for a period of time, or there is a kind of a uniqueness to what the social equity license holders are getting versus, the big players in the market. And so maybe, and I'm thinking this is probably 5 to 7 years down the line, but maybe one of those benefits is you can source, if you're able to build out a brand or a system where you have social equity applicants as part of an umbrella brand in a particular state, let's say, you're able to source at a lower cost. Maybe you are allowed to, have a certain region of social equity license holders in a certain place have a unique government-backed naming convention or product convention that others can't. So suppose you're focused on really high quality craft cannabis, which I think makes a lot of sense for social equity. If you can get to that, if you can actually differentiate and pay attention to the quality of what you're doing, because you're always going to be smaller scale than the bulk wine kind of producer out there, right? The boxed wine kind of producer out there. So, just kind of pointing that out, and would love to follow up after this session to talk to many of the folks involved here on where some of those solutions might make sense and how to connect with our, government connections to put forward some of those ideas around how to continually support the social equity winners and not just initially support or simply cut a check every year, but really try to carve out a niche so that they can succeed within there and are not outcompeted by the larger players.
And can I add real quick, just to say, I think it would be good to hear what are best practices, what's worked in some of these jurisdictions in these different aspects of licensure and fundraising. And Sean's program was, I was very motivated to hear how he was able to compete. Because I'll say any of these, we've seen this 100 times, right? I mean, with the COVID money for rental relief, states had billions of dollars, and I was engaged by a couple of them to spread the word that this rent money was available to people who couldn't afford to pay rent during COVID and had fallen behind. And if you looked at how it was executed from one state to the next, it was just amazing. Some of them, 90% of the money was never accessed because they made the application so difficult to file, or they just didn't spread the word effectively. And so I think there's something around that to learn as we're going. You know, this is a developing story, I know. But I think the more we hear about what's working in one state or one county or one, region, and they could say, let's use this as a model for this type of issue from an equity perspective. There's a lot that can be gained from that. Some of this is very tactical, right? We have to use the best tactics to get the outcomes. So that would just be a suggestion, and maybe another panel would shine light on what they're seeing out there that's working in their regions or markets.
We're coming to the official end time for this event at 1. So I wanted to just make sure if anybody's got questions that we cover it, who hasn't spoken yet. And if anybody wants to address Chance's comment, please go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I wanted to point out what Mark Sainer had to run. And so his question, and you'll see it in the chat, his comments as well, is what can we do next time in terms of events on these various themes? So, we've done the broader social equity theme. I think we'll have opportunities to deep dive into specific areas. Some of in summary, some of the things we were kind of highlighting is resources and connectivity for applicants. We can go further into that. The kind of public and private interaction part, we can certainly reach out to panelists who represent regulators that are looking at this space, whether it's at the state or federal level, and ones that are even in states that have done it for a while, and what's been their lessons learned, and share that mind share with some of the Midwest, East Coast folks as an example. But would love suggestions from anybody, panelists or audience, on where are some directions you'd like to see this go in terms of a deeper dive into some of these issues.
A brief comment on that, Anand. Do you think that it would be helpful to have recommendations of I'd like to look at this on a more global space, obviously, because I work in emerging markets around the world. So I would definitely suggest that there would be a great benefit to looking at some of the themes around the world.
Great, thank you. Yep, make a note of that. I'd love to have folks from Germany in the new government, the UK, African, Asian connections. On Asia mostly is doing CBD, but all of those are part of our network. So we'll look at
on that, what might even be just kind of interesting if anybody would know. I mean, since Holland has been doing it for as long as we know, has social equity ever been an issue in Holland in the cannabis space, and how have they addressed it? That could be interesting.
That's true.
If anybody knows anybody in Holland.
Yep, I got those connections, Lauren. We're global operation here, so
that would just be interesting to just find out. Because Holland is having its own, quote, diversity kind of issues, right?
Well, in Holland,
just like every other European country.
And Holland is now actually going from kind of a gray market to a fully legal market, where they're doing a program. They've given out, I think it's 5 or 10, less than 10 or less licenses. I'm interested to follow up and see what type of licenses those were. But previously, the supply chain for the stuff you could get in Amsterdam's, cannabis lounges and bars was not legal and regulated to the level it's going to be now. And so now they're trying to do, a fully legal program. So can definitely reach out to folks. I know they're about it. If there's no other questions pressing, we are at the end of the session, and I've got to run on to another event. I know you all have other commitments as well. So I wanted to thank 361 Firm. Jim, thank you for co-moderating as always. Darla, thank you for putting everything together. And all of the folks involved that have recommended panelists to us and have attended previously. So we'll be doing further events, so please stay tuned. And thank you for the really great conversation today.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks so much to all the panelists.
Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Bye, Anand. Bye, everyone.
Bye, take care.